Well, have you ever bent or flexed a rule for your favor or benefit? Some awkward laughing. There was a time, my boys, Nathan were 9, Brady was 6, and we were coming home from vacation, stopped at a water park in Ohio. Had some really cool water slides. And so we get there, and it's like the boys want to do the water slides, of course, because it's the best part of the park. And so not long after we get there, I look from afar, and I see my oldest son, Nathan, 9 at the time, coming down the water slide, just pure happiness and bliss. 10 seconds later, I'm expecting to look up and see Brady coming down the water slide, but instead I see Brady coming down the stairs. Dejected and bummed because the rule is you have to be 48 inches to ride the slide, and Brady clocked in at 47 and change. That's ridiculous. He knows how to swim. Brady, check out the other slide over there. I'm sure they'll let you through over there. Same thing happens. I know why they had the rule. I get it. It's a safety thing. But what they don't know about Brady is Brady's a Florida boy that's been swimming since he's 1. And at 47 inches and 6 years old, he can outswim many of the 55-inch, 10-year-old Ohio boys. I'm just saying. So I get why they had the rule. I just didn't quite think it fit for our family and for our purposes that day, which was to have fun. And so I bring my 2 boys together and I hatch a plan and I say, all right, here's what we're going to do. It's about 10 minutes from a shift change. We will wait for the shift change. And here's what's going to happen. Nathan and Brady, you're going to go up together. Nathan, you're a little bit bigger, a little bit taller. You're going to block the existence of Brady for as long as humanly possible so that the lifeguard has no eyes on Brady. And what you're going to do, Nathan, is you're going to go on the slide and you're going to go down, and Brady, you're going to go as quick to that slide as possible. Sit down and obey the instructions from there. Cross your arms and hopefully you don't get caught. If you do, then backup plan B would be you will stand on your tippy toes. Not a lot, but just a little. Puff your chest, raise your head up a little bit, act confident. Don't be biting your fingernails and acting all fidgety. If you want to have fun. So the moment came. I had taught my kids well. And I can't see what's going on up at top, but soon enough, I see my 9-year-old Nathan coming down the water slide, pure happiness and bliss. And this is the moment of truth. In 10 seconds, I'm going to see, son's coming down. Is he coming down on the slide or the stairs? And in 10 seconds after that, I see not a dejected, bummed, stair-lowering Brady, but the thrill-riding, sliding Brady, with so much happiness because now he's on the water slide. And guess what? Once you go down once, you get to go down over and over and over. Now, I bent the rules. The lifeguard might be fired, but I didn't feel like that law applied to me. I'm sensing a lot of judgment, by the way. Like, seriously. I feel it across the screen as well. People in Northwest Omaha and Fremont and here at I Street, like, get your halos off because I know you've done things like this. Right? I'm talking to a group of people. Let me just call a few of these out. I bet that there's been a husband and wife duo that have gone out to a restaurant and ordered one soda, and you've both had drinks from that soda. I'm just saying. I bet there have been people that have brought food and drink into movie theaters because it's cheaper somewhere else. And I tell you, if you're going spirit of the law on this thing, or letter of the law, that even bringing a mint in is breaking the rules. I bet there's people that you see speed limits. Why are you laughing? As speed suggestions. In the ballpark is what that's asking for. Ballpark, about 7 to 9 over. What we're talking about today is spirit of the law and letter of the law. How many of you would say just naturally you are more of a letter of the law? You're a rule following, commandment obeying, kind of, that sort of pursuer. How many are a letter of the law people here? How many are a letter of the law people? Raise your hands, all campuses. How many of you would say, I'm a spirit of the law person, right? I get why it's there, but there's certain rules that need to be bent. Yeah, very good. We got a lot of spirit of the law people here at I Street. You're going to like this. Well, the good news for all of us is Jesus is going to come after all of us. The letter and the spirit of the law people. Welcome back to Nuts and Bolts, our sermon series where we are constructing a disciple from the ground up. We have defined a disciple as one who is in the process of being and doing like their leader. Our leader, of course, being Jesus. Process, of course, meaning it's not a destination. It's a journey that over time we hope to just be improving and continuing to be and do more and more like Jesus. We're in the third week of our series. In week one, like you would build a home, we laid the foundation of this series. And we said that the foundation of a disciple, if it's being and doing, is the question we have to ask then is, am I committed to being and doing like Jesus? It's where he ends the Sermon on the Mount, is to be a hearer and a doer of his word. Are you committed to that? Is that your foundation? Last week, we looked at the design of a disciple and asked, why would we even want to pursue this life? Why would we be a disciple? And we said, really, it's twofold. Number one, that you get the opportunity to bring the kingdom of heavens to earth right now, which is what the Sermon on the Mount is all about. And number two, that as you do that, not only are you helping others, but you are experiencing happiness, purpose, and significance, things we all crave. Today, we're going to be looking at the framework of discipleship. It's awesome to have a foundation. It's great to have a blueprint and a design that tells us where we're going and why we go that direction. But at some point, we got to start to build this thing up. And that's the question I want to ask today is, what holds discipleship up? What holds you up as a disciple? What helps you stand tall no matter what life brings at you? We've got a lot of work to do today. Matthew chapter 5, we're going to go from verse 17 all the way to 48. So here we go this morning. Do not think, Jesus says, that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Hinge verse right here, verse 20. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you certainly will not enter the kingdom of heaven. The section starts by reminding us, Jesus says, I came and I did fulfill the law perfectly. That's what I came to do. But if you want to try to build your house or your walls up through your own righteousness, the first test is your righteousness has got to exceed that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And if you don't know much about the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, these were really good, law-abiding, rule-following, commandment-pursuing people. And Jesus is saying, if you want to enter into the kingdom of heavens, you got to be better than that. To which most of the people in the crowd that day would have listened and would have responded, well, if that's what it takes and my own righteousness has to exceed that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, I don't know how I'm going to get in. I don't know how I'm going to get into the kingdom of heaven. And what Jesus is about to say now are 6 countercultural sort of reframing righteousness, where he's going to tell the Pharisees, teachers of the law, and all those listening that you thought the letter of the law was this, and it was that, and it is good that you follow the letter of the law, but there's a spirit of the law underneath it that even if you followed the letter, I've called you to follow the spirit too. Some of the things Jesus is going to say today are phrases that we know and we memorize and we say, Christians and non-Christians alike. This is where you're going to get the phrases like turn the other cheek and eye for an eye and let your yes be your yes and pray for your enemies. So we're going to dive into these 6 sections. What we're going to do is we're going to get what we need to get out of each one of them and try to talk about a little bit of cultural context to get the thing underneath the thing that is the same thing in all the things, which is, if you're going to rely on your own righteousness, you've got to follow the letter and the spirit of the law all the time. So here we go. Verse 21, you've heard it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, raka, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Jesus is going to reframe righteousness. And in all 6 of these, there's a pattern. He's going to say, you have heard it said this way, ... but I tell you this. In other words, you have heard the letter of the law. Great, good that you did that. But I tell you there's a spirit underneath this thing that this is really what it's about at the heart level. And so what he's doing is he's talking to a lot of people, again, Pharisees and teachers of the law in that crowd today, as well as those that were not Pharisees and teachers of the law. And he was saying to the ones that are even those letter of the law rule followers, awesome. The commandment was do not murder. And so if I were to ask you to raise your hands, I'm not going to. If you've ever murdered somebody, first off, I hope I'd see very few, if any. Cool, check, you've not murdered, letter of the law followed, awesome. But the spirit of the law underneath it is, I don't want you to think ill will against anyone else or to have anger or hatred towards your brother or sister. That's the heart of it, is as Kingdom of Heaven disciples, you are not angry, hate-filled people. That's not who I've called you to be. So I get it, like cool that you haven't murdered, but there's something underneath it that it's not just about looking good on the outside, it's about being right on the inside. And we've got a lot of people there that are saying raka, which is translated raka into English as like numbskull, brainless idiot, nimwit. Those are seriously the translations. It's kind of crazy, but actually a lot of people think it's less about the translation and more just a way of saying something that sounds like you're collecting spittle to make spit. That's what you're thinking of somebody else, which clearly your heart's not in the right place. Dallas Willard, who wrote an incredible book, The Divine Conspiracy, talks about all of this righteousness, and he says, to be sure, law is not the source of rightness, but it is the course of rightness. He's putting law in its place, that we are not right by our fulfillment of the law, but it is the course that disciples try to follow. Jesus moves to adultery. Verse 27, you've heard it was said, you shall not commit adultery, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Again, a similar structure. They're saying, hey, we've never committed adultery. Check, letter of the law fulfilled. And again, if I were to ask, have you ever committed adultery? Have you ever slept with someone who is not your spouse, had an affair? There would be some hands. But if I were to go further with that into the heart and the spirit of the law to say, have you ever thought lustful thoughts or looked lustfully at somebody else? There's going to be a lot more hands. Feels like an impossible standard for Jesus that Jesus is calling us to live by. And if you were to do an honest assessment of even just the first 2 things that we brought up, which is anger and hate and violence and revenge and sexual, like how much of our entertainment that we consume, the movies and television shows and music that we listen to, like how much of that is just rife with these things, with anger and violence and sexual things to them, which tells us that even if we're not doing the actions on the outside, man, our appetites are strong for this and we're filling them. Now, I want to correct something that I do think some people incorrectly teach. Jesus, what he's not saying is that murder and adultery are at the same level of sin as anger and having lustful thoughts. Where they maybe could be at the same level is that any breaking of any law falls short of the glory of God. True. But in our world, clearly, there are deeper and more consequences for things like anger, things like murder and adultery than there are anger and lustful thoughts. But the point Jesus is making is I don't want any of that, outside or inside stuff, if you're going to rely on your own righteousness. If you're still feeling good about yourself, let's move to divorce. It's been said anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality makes her the victim of adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. And this one is quite ridiculous. The first 2, do not murder, do not commit adultery, come right out of the 10 Commandments. This one comes out of an obscure law in Deuteronomy chapter 24, which talks about when it is permissible for a man to divorce his wife, which already from the onset of even saying that, you can see this is not skewed towards women's favor. This is a brutal thing that only a man, likely in most cases, could divorce a wife. And if you were one of those women that were divorced, it was brutally hard, if not impossible, to come back from that. That is not right. And at the time of Jesus, divorce was a hotly debated topic. And there were two main schools of thought taught in Jewish schools with Jewish rabbis. One of them was that divorce is only permissible through sexual immorality or adultery. But there was another school of thought, another school of rabbis that taught, no, actually, there's many grounds for divorce. And if your wife does anything that displeases you, if she overcooks your food and it's not to your liking, you can go ahead and get a divorce. Guys, that's not, by the way, the same today. One of the rabbis was Rabbi Akiba, and he said, it's written that if there is another woman that is more pleasing to your eyes than your current wife, then that would be grounds for divorce. Ugh. Not cool. And so Jesus, again, is going to cut through the letter of the law and remind us there's something more to this. Along with what he would later say in Matthew 19, which is a more full exposition of Jesus' thoughts on marriage, what Jesus is doing is saying there is a letter of the law, but there is a spirit of the law. And what you need to know about the spirit of the law is that marriage is not a disposable contract. It's a sacred covenant that two people make with one another. And you don't end it just because your spouse doesn't always live up to your liking or your expectation. That is not the intent of marriage. Marriage is not the place where you look for loopholes. Marriage is the place where you honor your covenant. And again, I wish I could unpack each of these because each one of these 6 could be a full sermon. Jesus talks more about marriage in Matthew chapter 19, but we're trying to get the main thing underneath the thing to you so that you understand that Jesus, if you're going to rely on your righteousness, is asking for you to be a person who is righteous, not just with the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law too. We move to oaths next. Again, you've heard it said to the people long ago, don't break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you've made. But I tell you, don't swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is by God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Some translations say, let your yes be your yes, and your no be your no, and anything beyond this comes from the evil one. I think we all know people, maybe we're one of them, that jump to, I swear, on whatever, my grandmother's grave, on the Bible, on the heavens, on all that is sacred, I swear. And Jesus, of course, is saying that if you're the type of person that always has to put I swear anything, like what kind of person are you? Be more trustworthy, that you don't need to swear by these things. But we swear. Do pinky swears when we're little. I'll say something to you, but I'll do the opposite, but it's okay because my fingers were crossed. Ha! Or I might not cross my fingers. I might not pinky swear. I might do the opposite of what I just said to you, but do you know what today is? Opposite day. Which I never quite got that, because if it's opposite day, then it's not opposite day. And anyway, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too long. I think Jesus is definitely saying, don't lie. Don't stretch things. But Dallas Willard argues in his book, and I really like this way of thinking because I think it hits more with the overall theme of the Sermon on the Mount, that there's something deeper underneath this. And the people, what were they doing? They were swearing by God's name for their benefit. In other words, they were trying to throw the weight of God onto a statement that didn't need to have the weight of God on it. Does that make sense? So anytime you're using God for your own man-made purposes, you are manipulating his name in order to get what you want. Here's the way it's played out today. I bet you can think of a time where somebody said, God told me, ... And as they're telling you what God told them, your face is trying to be really neutral on the outside, and on the inside you're like, I don't think God would say something like that. But the moment, I get this all the time, someone says, God told me, guess what can't happen any further? There is no logical or rational conversation that can happen. They are looking for agreement and to manipulate you into seeming like what they're saying is weightier than it actually is. God told me it's okay for me to get a divorce. God told me it's okay for me to date this unbeliever. God told me I could sleep and live with my boyfriend, girlfriend. God told me that Jesus is coming back on this day. Really? There was a woman at my church in Florida when I was leading down there that had a feeling that God told her something. And she went through 3 or 4 of the staff at our church, and I trusted the discernment of the staff that we had built, and all of them did not think that what God told her was appropriate, but she was not listening, because you can't have logical, rational conversations with people that say, God told me. So finally she met with me and she told me what God told her, and as I was listening, I was trying to listen without bias, and I responded to her, I get that you think God told you that, but the Bible that I read, which I know is God's word, also says that Satan is the father of lies. And what that means is he's really good at twisting and deceiving things that sound really similar to the voice of God, but actually are the voice of Satan. And when I hear what you say, I'm more inclined to believe that you have not heard the voice of God, but instead the voice of the enemy. And she left the church. Now, could I have been a little more sound or soft in my response? Maybe, but the other 3 tried that. And she was not listening. She was there for agreement and to manipulate us into thinking something bigger and something different than what God was actually up to. And so again, the point that Jesus is making is not that you ought to never make oaths. There's an appropriate time for you to make oaths. The point is, don't ever misuse my name. Don't misuse it or use it in vain for your own purposes. I really think that that's actually more what the 10 Commandment initially, don't misuse my name or use the name of the Lord your God in vain. It has less to do with cussing, though you shouldn't cuss, and more to do with stop using God's name to manipulate people to get what you want for your man or woman made purposes. And you know what? Pastors like me have to be really careful about this. Because I would love to tell you certain things that might sound like good theology that I really believe will grow the church if I could say these things. But you know what it would be? Manipulating you, throwing the weight of God onto bad theology and trusting that you don't know about it. And that's really the big question for you individually that I think we're really struggling with as a nation collectively is, do you know God's word well enough to know when somebody is taking what sounds like what God says, but is twisting and manipulating it just enough to actually be the voice of Satan? We have to be really careful. And Lord willing, I haven't done much of that, but I say a lot of words to you every week. And so at some point, you've got to say, your relationship with your God is your own. And we want to be there for you, but we're going to make mistakes at times. Number 5, you have heard it was said, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, but I tell you, don't resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, give him your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. And if anyone, give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who borrows from you. Now, the whole eye for an eye, tooth for tooth thing is an Old Testament law, but I think it's been wrongly misunderstood for a long time. Because I think a lot of us, when we hear eye for eye, tooth for tooth, we think that God is about revenge and God is about vengeance and getting back what's yours. But actually, I see it as the opposite, because in the Old Testament days when that rule came about, I see the eye for eye, tooth for tooth as not as escalating revenge, but actually putting a stop to it. Because think about it, when somebody steals from you, what do you want to do? You want to steal back what was yours and hurt them in another way. And what God is saying in the Old Testament is you are not a people that continue to escalate revenge and vengeance and keep going with that. And here he's reframing it even more. Same idea, but challenging us in a little different way. And on the surface, it can seem like God is just telling me to sit back and take it and take abuse. And there have been a lot of people that have misinterpreted this passage and stayed in abusive and oppressive relationships. And that's not what God is asking or telling you to do. God is, a lot of these things, not asking you to take them literally, but describing the types of people underneath that he is calling you to be. And most people, when they look at this in a little more detail, especially when you look into the Greek and the scholarship of what this actually means, is what Jesus is saying, similarly to the Old Testament, ramping it up a little bit and reframing it, is saying, don't stand against evil in the same way that evil is standing against you. It's not eye for eye, tooth for tooth. We are not the people that needs to stand against evil in the same way that evil has stood against you. So he's not saying stay in that abusive relationship, be a doormat. He's saying no, as the people, the kingdom of heaven disciples, you are not ones that seek revenge and even escalate revenge. You are ones that put a stop to it and stand in a different way that look different than the rest of the world. Make sense? Okay, I heard a 7-year-old say yes. Move on. If kids can understand, you too can, maybe. Sixth and final section, one we've all mastered. Love your enemies. Sarcasm. Verse 43, you've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors, the slimy group of tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only or talk only to your own people, what are you doing more than others? Don't even the pagans do that? Jesus is concluding this incredible countercultural, confusing section by saying, don't seek destruction and ill will of your enemies, but rather I want you to love and pray for them. And this is, remember, a culture that a lot of the ones on that hillside were being oppressed by the Roman government, a real oppressive enemy over them. Sometimes it's hard for us in comfortable, convenient Nebraska to think about the oppression that they had. And yet I would argue that even in our collective comfort and convenience, we still very much struggle with this. I think our natural response, the world would say, is that if someone hurts you, kind of building on the last one, you can hurt them and you can say negative things about them. You can sort of side up with those that are on your side and listen to the echo chambers that'll tell you more of what you already are telling yourself. And you can listen to the extremism that's filled with hate and anger and sometimes bigotry. And you can go after them and you ought to blast the other side on social media. That's what you ought to do. Or if you're not into social media, how about you blast the reputation of that person and you gossip and you share all sorts of negative things about them so that others see them for who they really are. A couple of weeks ago when two political national leaders had a confrontation, we saw this in our own country, right? Where there are two sides, very clear, Republicans and Democrats, that each side believes they are 100% right, 0% wrong. And the other side is 100% wrong and 0% right. And we name, call, we blame, we raka our brothers and sisters that are different than us. When Jesus is saying that's not what kingdom of heaven disciples do. It's okay for you to have opinions on things. But have you ever prayed for the one that you're so against? Tried loving them? Got to hear their story, maybe why they believe what they believe. I found that it's really hard to be an enemy for someone I'm praying for. The last two sections specifically are the core text that Martin Luther King Jr. used to start the nonviolent civil rights movement. He said this, hate for hate only intensifies the existence of hate and evil in the universe. But the strong person is the person who can cut off the chain of hate, the chain of evil. It does not stand against evil in the same way that evil stands against. And instead, they get to inject within the very structure of the universe that strong and powerful element of love. So how you doing right now? I heard a ugh. I have kind of intentionally wanted you to sit in your crap for a while today. Because that's what Jesus does in this sermon. He tells you if you're a letter of the law person, you failed. Every Pharisee and teacher of the law there should feel like I have flunked this test. I thought I passed, I flunked. But also, if you're a spirit of the law person, really? Have you lived up to it? You should feel like you have miserably flunked. And if for some reason you're not with the rest of us sinners, can I read the last verse for you? Because here you'll join us. Jesus says, be perfect. Therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. I've wanted you to sit in it because there are too many of us that think as disciples, we're gonna build our house, build our walls on our own righteousness. And Jesus at the beginning says, if you want to play that game, you got to be better than people that are really good at it. And at the end tells you, you got to actually be perfect. Because even they're failing and flunking. I believe this section of the Sermon on the Mount will make you feel worse about yourself, but better about Jesus. Because it's in this section that we realize that you and I cannot fulfill the law, spirit, letter, any of it. And we cannot build our frame of our house with what we do. And the beautiful invitation for all of us into a kingdom of heaven disciple is through this thing called a cross, where Jesus bore all the weight of every sin of you and me. All the time we failed letter of the law, all the time we failed spirit of the law, every single act of unrighteousness, Jesus took upon himself when he went to the cross. Is the cross, is the righteousness that Jesus won for you at the cross what your life is framed around and built upon? When they construct homes, there's a really important part of the structure to keep a house strong. So we're not just building walls, we're making the whole framework put together. And there's a thing that comes together somewhere usually in the middle, and you don't want to know what it's called? Good, you're not in construction like I am either. Cool. It's called a cross beam. Did you know that? Isn't that cool? Your very house and its structure and why it will stand even in vulnerable times is because there's a cross beam that is meant to bear the weight and the load of whatever the world brings, even what you do to your own home. There is a cross beam that holds it up. And the strength of God in your life is not you doing perfectly, it's Jesus doing it perfectly for you. Houses do not hold up without a crossbeam, and disciples do not hold up without the cross. It was at the cross where this thing that Martin Luther called the great exchange happened, where you get to bring all of your crap and all of your junk and put it on the shoulders of the one who was perfect. So he who was not an adulterer became an adulterer. He who was not a murderer bore all the murders on his shoulders. He that never broke an oath broke every oath on his shoulders. He that had never manipulated others manipulated others. He became your sin so you could wear his righteousness. He that had no sin became sin so that when you receive his grace, the Father sees you, who before Christ had broken so many laws, and even still today is going to break some stuff. But he sees you as perfect. And as perfect sons and daughters, now you want to become and do like the people Jesus talks about. Not because you have to, but because what other way is there? Dallas Willard, I'll close with his words. He said, "Is it then hard to do the things which Jesus illustrates in the kingdom heart of love?" He says, "It's very hard indeed if you've not been substantially transformed in the depths of your being. But once that happens, then it is not hard. And what would be hard is to act the way you acted before. That is gold. We want to be and do like the people Jesus describes because of what he's done for us. And so I want to close today with a challenge and a prayer. My challenge, as I mentioned in week 1, is like, what fools would we be? That's what Jesus calls us. We would be so foolish if we just read through these words these 5 weeks and don't do any of them. And so I want you to do what Jesus talks about in our section today. Do as many of the 6 as you feel like you need to do. Maybe you have a conflict and there's anger and hatred towards a brother or sister. Might this be the week you talk about it? Maybe you're living in lustful thoughts and acting out on that. Might this be the week where you bring your sin to light and put practices and accountability in place? If you're a person who's struggling in your marriage and you're trying to find a way to get out, what if rather than looking for loopholes, you took a step in to that covenant that you made? What if this is the week you stop using God to manipulate others for what you want? What if this is the week where there's just a cycle of revenge that keeps going and you have perpetuated it, and this is the week you put an end to it? And what if this is the week that you, in fact, do pray for someone who's really been a jerk to you? That is what Kingdom of Heaven disciples look like. And when you do it imperfectly, thank God our framework is built on the righteousness and perfection of Jesus. Amen? Like all campuses, to stand as I pray for you. I want to give an opportunity for you to bring your junk to God, to receive his grace anew, and to commit to being a disciple and doing the things he called you to do. And so, God, we humbly stand before you. The law felt really thick and really hard today. And not just the things that were mentioned from stage, but in this moment, God, I bring all of my sin and brokenness and mess to you. And I would encourage you in your own hearts right now to give that sin over to God. Don't hold it any longer. And Lord, through the great exchange, we bring our worst to you and receive your best for us. We receive your grace. Your word says when we confess our sin, you are faithful and just, and you will forgive us from all of our unrighteousness. So God, if someone has felt beat down and oppressed and struggling with the weight of their own sin, would it be lifted off today? Would they see you at the cross and know that their worst was there with you, and it is done and it is paid for? And out of gratitude, with your kindness that leads us to life change, we commit to being the Kingdom of Heaven disciples you've called us to be. Help us to be those people. It's not going to be easy. The world will have nothing to do with even beautiful ways to live. So may we do it together, and may we feel your spirit as we live. We pray this in your name, and together we say,